Hello and welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. Thanks for hanging out with us. I imagine we're all at home hanging out in your new remote setup, week 3 for many of us. So we appreciate you kind of sharpening the saw with us. I've got a great conversation lined up. I am joined by my good friend, Dave Kennett. Dave, what's up, man?
Hey, Scott. Great to be here. Thank you for having me, and hello, everybody. Do you like my new remote background that I installed?
I like it. Thank you. So not real brick. You didn't have the...
Should I let everyone in on this little sort of Replayz secret?
I don't know.
Let's be vulnerable. Order it on Amazon for $60. Boom, there's the Replayz brand.
I love it. I love it, man. It looks good. Cool. So, Dave, what we're talking about today, how to avoid the most common pitfalls in sales conversations. So this is a topic that, is really, really important right now. And one, because you might not be getting that many sales conversations to begin with. So your at-bats might be going down. So it's even more important that when you do have sales conversations that you're making the most out of them. So, but Dave, before we get into this discussion, tell us a little bit about your background. Who are you? What's Replayz all about? And why should we listen to you about sales conversation?
Oh, that's a fair question. I'll start with the personal part. I've been in sales for my whole career. So I'm 44 now. And I remember in my work terms at university, I was in sales related roles. So I guess that means 24 years in sales. And I grew up on Vancouver Island, actually, and as you know, and I'm in Vancouver now. And I was in progressively more senior roles throughout the years. I was with a startup in the .com age for about 3.5 years. And someone said to me about 3 years in, hey, sonny boy, someone like, way older than me, probably 44, said, go big business early. So I did that, actually. And they're like, learn on a big company dime. Now, for all you folks that are listening that are in startups, I'm not recommending you rush out and do that today. I think startups are awesome, and they've been very formative in my career. But then went to a company called W.W. Grainger, which Ackland's Grainger here in Canada, several billion-dollar company, and I learned a lot of good, solid sales process there. Worked my way up. That was when I was a first-time manager back in, I guess, 2006 or something, in field sales. And then was brought on after 5 years there. I went to Auto Trader, ironically, right through the last crisis, right? So when Auto Trader relied on two things, the automobile industry and print. And print was dying, and so was the automobile. The automobile industry wasn't dying, but it was certainly struggling. And so I was brought in to help in British Columbia, help with the digital transformation. So for 3.5 years as director of sales, I did that. And then the last handful of years, last 9 years, I've been in various startups. Some had legs and took off, and some didn't have product market fit and didn't. It's once you kind of get a taste of some success, which we've certainly have with a few startups, it's very, very exciting. So that's a quick background on me, my experience, and I suppose there's two reasons why people, to answer your next question, why they should, why I might have something valuable to say. Sure, my personal experience, but it's more about our Replayz experience, which is we've watched hundreds and listened to hundreds of sales conversations, whether it's SDRs doing cold reach outs, inbound SDRs, most of it's been account executives and some customer success calls where we've developed this Replayz methodology. We've learned what connects with a prospect. There's actually 100 points that we've distilled down. We're going to share some of those with you today.
Very cool. Very cool. So many of the listeners, Sales Hacker community who are joining us may have heard of, the gongs or the choruses of the world that will actually, allow you to store the data and maybe pick out trends. And then there's, companies like Replayz where you actually have, ex-CROs, ex-VPs of sales who are, coaching against this 100-point methodology. You actually know what is success, not just, the technology component. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So actually, people say all the time, hey, we've got Gong or Chorus, so we don't need Replayz. And ironically, most of our customers actually use Gong, Chorus, or Refract, or what have you. And, it's kind of like, and those technologies are awesome. I highly recommend them, but they're different than Replayz. So having those is like having the home gym, right? But then bringing Replayz in is like having a personal trainer on, keeping folks accountable on how to use the home gym. So that's really how to think about Replayz is reps send us their recorded calls and demos and video calls, audio calls, doesn't matter. And our international team of coaches give feedback on them, kind of like we do in demolitions.
Yeah. I love it. And not to do a Replayz plug, but I think it's important to understand, that there has been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours over, your whole team of where this is actually coming from and where we're speaking to today. So before we dive into it, super quick housekeeping. So this is recorded. So if your kid starts bugging you, or you got to go, feed the dog or whatever it is you got to do. I know there's a lot of distractions at home. We will send this out within 24 hours. So don't worry about that. And then, me and Dave are lucky we get to hang out and talk all the time. He's actually been a mentor of mine and a dear friend for a long time. So we can talk all day long about this all the time, but we do these for the sales hacker community. So it's way more fun for us when the audience is engaged. So if you want to go down to the Q&A quickly or the chat functionality, introduce yourself, your name, your title, and if you have any questions for either of us as we go, please don't hesitate to reach out. We could all probably use some extra human connection right now as we're isolating. So those are my two things. All right. So Dave, as we kind of dive in, you did just make a really, really cool announcement. I saw it on LinkedIn, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't highlight it in a really big way, because I think it's something fantastic for the sales community, fantastic for humanity at large. And can you talk about the initiative that you have going on right now that is really helping families affected by the coronavirus, COVID-19, and how some of these people maybe on this webinar can help?
Yeah, for sure. I'll post a link on here actually in a second to my post, because that would help a lot. So I think we all during these times feel a need to help, right? And a desire for closeness and that kind of thing. So I've kind of felt kind of called or pulled to helping families. So like I personally have been laid off before. And it's been tough, and having that conversation with the kids, and spouse tough. But right now we've almost got this unprecedented, at least in our age, situation where we've got both partners sometimes laid off, and kids and they may have been already paycheck to paycheck, right? And now they're trying to figure out how to put food on the table. And in the past, maybe the school helped out with that. Well, schools are closed, and not all the schools have their programs back up and running because of social distancing. And food banks are then the next place you would want to engage. And a lot of them are getting actually low on food. And so I was like, what can we do personally to help? So this is something where in April, we'd like to raise enough money to create 1 million meals for families. And I just keep thinking about kids, right? Imagine, having to say to your kids for the first time ever, hey, I don't think we can actually put food on the table 3 meals a day. We need to ration. Like, that's happening everywhere. For everyone listening here, it's happening in your community, and more than likely right now. And so I just think that is something that we can help with. So what we're doing is we've got a Replayz certification program. It's live training via Zoom. It's a 3-week program. It's 9 sessions, an hour at a time. So 9 one-hour sessions. We're providing it absolutely free. But what we're asking is for an organization to participate in it, we're asking them to include a receipt for a $1,000 donation they've made to their local food bank. So it's $2,100 typically for Replayz certification, this 3-week, 9-hour program. It's absolutely free, but price of admission is company donating. Now, I also get, Scott, that this is a tough time for a lot of companies. So we're not asking, we want to be sensitive to that. It's those that have the means, right, to do it. If it's okay, I would love to put the link to the post I just did and ask anyone that's interested in helping share that and get it out there.
I love it. I love it. I just put the LinkedIn post that you did in the activity there. So please, if you're on this and you want to help us spread this world on the A Million Meals initiative that Dave is doing, please like, comment, share it out. Do what you can to help, because I think it's a fantastic initiative, and Sales Hackers is very proud to support it. And thank you for everyone. I want to say a few shout outs here. Wow, we got a lot of people joining us today. I think we had close to 1,000 people register. We got Luke Binder. Luke, what's up, man? Mark Ramsey, shout out. Eric Owen, CRO of an IoT company. Kirsten Lutz, what's up, Kirsten? Chad Spain. Carolyn from St. Louis in the house. Gene Butin. Sherrod, sales leader out of Ontario. More Canadians. I love it. Kirsten, Jay, Carlos, Jermaine McKinnon, Jay, Kenneth Louie, Braxit Ejamera, Colin, Nick Cassie, Kelly, Amanda Bagley says, Amanda's 8-year chili pepper and a huge fan of Demolition. So if you guys don't know, me and Dave actually do a video series together where we break down real-time demos. So check it out. But all right, I'll do more shout outs in a bit. I'm getting tired here. Dave, all right. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, I guess, because sales conversations have changed over the last 2 weeks, and fairly dramatically they've changed. In your eyes, how have you seen those changes take place, in this new environment that we find ourselves in?
Well, I think there's fear, right? As a business owner myself, of course, that sneaks in sometimes myself. And it's fear of the unknown. It's how is this going to impact my business? So for those of you that are in sales on this call, which is, I think, pretty much everyone, I'd like you to think through your prospects. Anyone that was in your pipeline previous to this crisis, and anyone you're talking to now, and I'm sure this is a no-brainer, it's table stakes, I'm sure you already thought of this, but it's like what I'm hearing from a lot of our customers and our customers' customers is that those that haven't been deeply impacted yet, who we think might have budget, are actually scared to release budget because they think they might be impacted. Mm-hmm. Those that are actually in high growth are still holding on budget because they're afraid of what might happen. And then those that have already been drastically impacted, of course, are very, very clamped down on their budget. So first and foremost, getting inside their head. And I saw a great post by Devin at Gong. We'll give him a shout out. I was actually talking to him earlier today about, how do you make a solid case for business in these tough times? And I think, Scott, for me, it comes down to a few things. And I like his idea of think like the CFO, right? So if you're a CFO, what do you care about? Bottom line. So you care about growth, but you also care about watching expenses. So as sales reps, we always have to be good at making the ROI case, right? Making the business case. And we, through those hundreds of demos and sales conversations we've seen, even starting right top of funnel with SDRs, we don't see the ROI case being made strong enough. We're sloppy in general at doing that. So we need to stop being sloppy and be very crystal clear about how our solution delivers ROI. Sometimes we think, oh, that's for the closing part, right? Or that's what we start talking about pricing. Very early in the conversation now, I think it's important to acknowledge, hey, I understand that it's tough times. We see everything on LinkedIn right now about empathy, and of course it's true, lead with empathy. But that's not gonna alone get you the sale, right? It's now leading into a business discussion. Our prospects hopefully have very good business acumen, and they're leading based on a dollars and cents discussion. So to the extent that your offering can actually provide ROI, let's seed that in early. And the other piece is, I see people that are hesitant to actually have video calls. They're still having phone calls. So for those that are a little bit foreign to video calls, please just know that the top salespeople, at least in software, use video call every single time. On account executive calls. SDR, a little bit different, right? But so we'll talk about some tips and tricks there on best practices if you're going to turn video on. But those are a few thoughts, sort of stream of consciousness that come to mind, Scott.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And something I'll add there is you have to go through your entire pipeline now. And I know it sounds like a scary and a large undertaking, depending how big your deals are and how many you work at one time. But anything that you thought was going to close in the next 6 months, you have to go and you have to requalify it. You have to go have another complete discovery call, because everything that was found out pre-COVID world is now completely different. You know, I'll tell you, I still sell myself and had, 45 deals in the pipeline. Every single one I'm having kind of call it rediscovery calls with, because the landscape has totally changed. So take that time and don't, put your head in the sand and think that, oh no, it's okay, they told me this was going to happen. Like, you got to take it head on, if you will. All right. So quickly go to a question. We got a good question. And this is a little off topic, but I'll put it in. So this is for cold outreach. So we're going to spend the majority of this time talking about, sales conversations around discovery and around, demos and things like that. Jamie has a question though, which I think a lot of people are thinking right now. For cold outreach during this time, what are some strategies for initial email connects that you recommend? Dave, do you have any strategies? I know this isn't fully your wheelhouse.
Yeah, for sure. So I think first and foremost, it's changed a little bit week by week, right? The very first week where everyone was remote, my advice was, hey, we were all trying to figure out what was going on, a little shell shocked. So it's like, give a bit of time. Now we're a few weeks in, and here's my overarching question. Do you still have value for your prospects? The same kind of value you had a few weeks ago? If the answer is yes, then you have business reaching out. The next question is, of course, this question: how do you reach out? And I think, yes, lead with empathy. Yes, don't be tone deaf. Make sure that you understand that they know you understand that the ground shifted underneath us. But it's still important to get your message out. So I would say personalization is the overarching theme I would keep in mind. Find something very interesting on the LinkedIn profile of that person that you're reaching out to and tie it in. Like, one of our sales team members today found out that there were 2 or 3 musical artists this one vice president of sales listens to, and there's another thought leader they liked. And so in the outreach, our sales rep sent out a note that included a couple links to some Spotify mixes of the artists they like, as well as the most recent article from that thought leader. So, and we get responses from that. It does take like 15, 20 minutes to craft some of those emails. So you got to think through, hey, does this fit with the order value size or ACV of my company? If it's more transactional, that ain't going to work. If it's more enterprise, it is going to work. What are your thoughts, Scott? Like, this really, our expertise at Replayz, as you point out, is we call it hello to goodbye, sales conversations. So I'm sharing a best practice that I have seen work, but it's really outside of our level of expertise. This is really more your expertise. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first off, the spray and pray is dead a long time ago, whether COVID was a thing or not. So hyper-personalization and more important, relevance. So relevance right now is super key. So if you were sending out, let's say 60 emails a day before this, I would break that down to 20 and go hyper-personalize, do your research, have empathy. And then, right now, a huge thing I'm seeing is everyone is on LinkedIn. All your decision makers right now are trying to keep a pulse on what's going on in the industry, and they're on LinkedIn, you know, and I can see it because I can, you know, you can basically use LinkedIn like an MSN tool right now. If you know, MSN Messenger back in the day, I'm getting immediate responses from executives. And if we have any leaders on this call, sales leaders, here's a play that's been working really well, is using a template, something along the lines of, hi, one of my BDRs on my team noticed that we were connected, and you don't even have to know this person overly well. Notice that we were connected, ask for an intro. Given the extremely tough landscape that we find ourselves in right now, I thought I would, you know, personally help out this BDR and make an introduction. Not sure where you're at in, you know, whatever you sell landscape, but, you know, I'm sure you can point them in the right direction. That's been working extremely well for us. So there's one tip. All right, let's get back into it. So what are some things sellers should avoid at all costs, not only in this environment, but all the time? What are the things that when you see demos that you're just like, oh, no?
Right, so a few things. Number one, don't make it about you, right? I see a lot of reps unknowingly, right, unwittingly, they talking too much and just making it about, hey, let me tell you about my company. Let me tell you about feature benefit. And what they miss is the pain. What they miss is really understanding what's important in that prospect's mind, not only organizationally, but, you know, going to a challenger methodology thought process of what's their individual value driver, what keeps them up at night personally. And that might tie into their KPIs, that kind of thing. So often, Scott, we see not just like beginning level reps, but actually senior reps who have done well on their own accolades, but they'll only just do discovery for like 3 minutes. And there's no blanket answer for how long you do discovery. It depends on how complex the sale is and the organization you're selling to. But I mean, man, even if it's transactional, you should be doing at least 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes of discovery, right? Mm-hmm. And for some organizations, at least a whole call, half hour to 45 minutes. And so number one, first and foremost, is stop talking about your company. People don't care. They care about their pain. And if you don't understand their pain, you're not actually going to effectively be able to address it. So I've got a few things I want to sort of answer on that one, but that's number one. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. I have a question there, just going one step further on that, because I agree. You have like an entire sales cycle falls apart if you don't do good discovery. I think you live and die by good discovery. How do you, though, when you front load discovery, you know, and you've got your first 15, 20 minutes of discovery, how do you do that without feeling like you're playing 21 questions or in like interrogation mode, as we'll call it? How do you walk that line between finding out all the information you need, but not just peppering them with questions? Because that's not a nice feeling as a buyer.
No, it's not. And we've got a few suggestions there that we know work very, very well. Before I get into that, though, I do want to point this out. If a prospect's level of tolerance for your questioning is this much, the average rep assumes that their tolerance is this much. Right. And so right off the bat, usually a rep thinks, and this might not be everyone that's listening, but a lot of reps we see think, oh my goodness, I'm just going to drive them crazy with this question. And the reality is, if you position it correctly and you navigate through the discussion effectively, they won't feel that way. So here are a few tips. Number one, I just had this conversation with a sales team this morning that we did a webinar for, and it's around setting agendas. Not all of them were setting agendas. And if you're not doing that today, make sure you do. It's important to, one of our most precious commodity in life, I think, is time. So if you're taking your prospects' time and your time, let's be clear on where we're going with it, right? And check for acceptance and make sure that's where they wanted to go with it. Again, about making it about them. So, you know, Replayz best practice, 3 steps is a brief roadmap for where you want to go in the discussion, and then state the value and check for acceptance. So it might sound something like this, Scott. You know, over the next 45 minutes, I can't wait to really dive in to learn more about your organization. And we do find it very valuable to ask a number of questions up front, because that helps make the back end of this conversation really customized to you and your needs. and actually makes it more valuable for you. How does that sound? So you see what I did there? My agenda took 15 seconds or something like that. It was roadmap. It was, here's why it's important. So I've asked their permission to ask questions, and I've told them why it's important to them. And then I've asked, check for acceptance. And then as we're navigating, so that's number one, is setting the expectation you're going to do that and why you're doing it. Then when you're actually going through it, I don't care how long you've been selling, write the questions down and have them there as a guide if you need them. You know, we started off by saying I've been selling for 24 years. I still write my questions down. I don't sound like I'm scripted, right? They're bullet points, but they're there as a reference point. I think we get sloppy over time because we get arrogant thinking, we got this, we know it. Truth is, sometimes we leave calls without having the data that we need. And so having that makes sense. The second is, and sorry I'm talking so fast, but I'm uber sensitive to the fact that we got a lot to go through. So,
yeah, of course. I love it.
And the next part is, a lot of reps think that a discovery needs to be a one-to-one give-take, meaning I ask a question and then I give some feedback. You don't, right? At the same time, to avoid them feeling like the 20 questions you talked about earlier, it is important to make it naturally conversational. And some tips around that are to say, make the conversation a little bit more joined together by being like, okay, I hear what you're saying. So if I could just clarify, what I think I hear you saying is boom, 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 boom. Is that right? So then you check for a shared mutual understanding. It splits it up a little. It's also okay to weave in the odd small customer story here and there for proof point, validation, while you're in discovery. Not going way far off the agenda, but saying, you know, that actually does remind me of this customer story. I just think it's the perfect use case for what you're talking about. We'll only go into more detail later, but the broad strokes are, and then just 15 seconds, boom. And then the other thing you can do is, once you're, like, we're sales professionals because we're meant to sense how our discussion is influencing the prospect. Again, why video is so important, right? And so if you're sensing that they're getting antsy and you're near the end of your discovery, you could always say, hey, I apologize for all these questions. We're almost through. I've just got a few more. I promise you it'll make it so much more impactful when we get to the pitch part. So those are a few ways that I recommend you make it a little bit more natural.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. There's something you said there really clicked, is that it's okay to ask a lot of those questions as long as you set the expectation, you know, that you can say something like, for example, Chris Voss would call this an accusations audit. So you basically, you put all of what you think they might be saying and you just call it out. You call out what you think they're thinking. So you say something like, hey, you're going to think I'm super annoying because I'm going to ask you all these questions and I'm just going to be peppering all these at you. And it's going to be super annoying. But hey, you know, the reason I'm doing this is so that we can, you know, have a really solid conversation down the line. And when you call out all those things, it doesn't give them power, and they're kind of ready for them. So I like that.
I really like that, Scott. I think that's fantastic. And it sort of takes away the anxiety on both sides. And I think the reps, honestly, if you were to ask me, like, the one thing that differentiates the top rep from the not top reps, it's actually this. It's discovery. Like, for those listening, you want to do this part better than your competitor, or you will be far less likely to get the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Here's an interesting question from Chad Spain. Chad, thanks for the question. Very topical, very relevant. So he mentioned, he's like, okay, so you just talked about how reps expect that their prospect will have less tolerance for the questions than they actually do. You know, we both, I think, can agree on that. Like, as long as you're setting the expectation, doing an accusations audit, you know, they'll put up with a lot of questions. How do you advise reps then transform their mindset around this? It's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. The way to do it is by experience. It's like seeing is believing. So do it 10 times and prove it to yourself. And think back and go, okay, the last 10 times that I extended my discovery from 5 minutes to 15 minutes, how often did I get a prospect looking angry, upset, annoyed? You're probably going to find at least 8 of those times 0. In fact, probably all of those times 0. And then I also want you to look back and go, how is my win rate improving? That's more longitudinal if you've got a longer sales cycle, but so it's a lagging indicator. But that's how I would approach that.
Yeah. Agreed. It's about getting those reps in, and sometimes the reps in, they don't have to necessarily even be, sales conversations. They could be just conversations in your normal life. Practice setting the expectation when you're going to kind of ask for something or ask a lot of questions. Next time you're at the grocery store asking for directions, say, hey, you're gonna find me really annoying for asking these questions, but what aisle is this and what aisle is that, and you'll see their response. So there is ways you can build it into your real life that will transfer over and kind of build that confidence. Okay, so moving on. I know we've got so many tips. I want to try and extract as many as I can from you, Dave.
Sure.
All right. So we mentioned, making it not about you. Super, super important. What are some other things that reps should kind of be avoiding at all costs? What are the other things that you see?
Well, talking too much, right? And I think, so we have a rule at Replayz: don't ever talk more than 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes without checking in. And even then, there's a difference between what the best reps do for check-ins and the ones that definitely aren't on the leaderboard. And that is, the best reps don't say, any questions? Best reps say, so based on what I just showed you, you mentioned that you had a demo with competitor ABC earlier on today. How does this feature compare to that? Or you mentioned earlier that X was a really big pain point within your organization today. Does this feature here solve it? Because when I think through our customer set, it really has helped them. Or can you tell me how you think this feature we just talked about would be deployed within your organization? So certainly, we would rather ask an open-ended question, and there are a couple closed-ended questions there that you can follow up by open-ended questions. But more importantly, if we just say, hey, any questions? More often than not, you're going to hear, no, I'm good. And I think a lot of reps think, okay, at the very end, that's when I'm going to lean in and say, hey, so you know what are your thoughts on all this? That's still a great question to ask. But what I think we want is a mental checklist throughout. Imagine a bunch of tick marks and X's for every 2 to 3 minutes of your discussion. And as you go on, the tick marks are where you've checked in and they've said, oh, I love it. I think our head of sales could totally get behind this. And the X marks are, yeah, you know what? We've had a bad experience with that kind of thing before. But it allows you to address that objection right there and then, expecting that 45 minutes down the road when you say, hey, what do you think? That they're going to remember that thing where there was an X, right? An objection, if there were multiple things especially, is unfortunately not realistic. So meaningful check-ins frequently throughout the conversation, very, very important.
Totally. No, does that make sense? I've dropped that many times in my early career, and now sometimes it will slip out. I'm like, oh, no. Because it doesn't give you much to work off of, right? You just get a yes. 99.9%, you just get a yes. Or so you need to get them to open up and open-ended. Craig just said, open-ended questions. And then when you get that answer, explore it a little bit, whether it's positive or negative. You can use a tactic called mirroring, where you basically just repeat the last 2 or 3 words of what they said back to them, and they'll usually open up more and more, and just keep talking and keep talking. It can be a very effective way to, get more out of each check-in.
So I think I'm hearing you say that mirroring is really important, Scott. Can you tell me more about that?
More about that?
Yeah.
We could just mirror each other back and forth for the rest of this.
That would add so much value. You know what I would say? I could not agree more. And so what I would say is, as sales professionals, this job, as we all know, might look easy. It's tough, right? If we really are going to do a good job of it, we've got a lot going on, especially now when you might have kids in the background or dogs or knocks on the door, and you're trying to really be present for the 3 people that are on the other end of the call or the video call. And you're thinking, okay, what am I going to tell them next? So I'm going to encourage everyone to do this. I want you to think through your last 5 calls. How present were you really? Like on the surface, you might go, yeah, I was listening. But did you really sit there for a sec to understand what was driving the question? It's not offside to ask the prospect where appropriate and where you're truly wondering, let me answer that for you, blah, blah, blah. By the way, I got to ask, what was driving that question? Oh, well, we just had this terrible experience with our current vendor, and let me tell you about it. Boom, you opened up a whole area. Whereas what we see reps do all the time is they'll say, you know, what keeps you up at night? Oh, blah, 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 blah. And then the rep will go, okay, good. And they go to their next question. It's like, no, like basically you should be asking lots of follow-up questions, lots of open probes, peel that onion, to use an overused term, but I love it still because it's a great visual for this, right? So yeah, I agree, Scott, like super, super important.
Yeah, yeah. And there's one more thing I'll throw in there too. Again, a lot of this is from Chris Voss. I took his masterclass the other weekend, so it's very top of my head, and it's what I see a lot of amazing sellers do is also labeling it. So, like you said, when you're present, you can draw conclusions based on what they said. So if they say, you know, I've got the CFO breathing down my neck, and it's pretty tough to get these budgets approved, you can label that and say, you know, it sounds like it would be a really stressful time for you. And then you just stop talking. And they will instinctually go further and be like, oh yeah, he's always doing this. And every time I try and get a tool in, he does this and this happens. And you'll just uncover so much when you give something, you know, a label. It can be very, very effective.
I agree. And actually, just on that note, sorry, Scott, just one last thing.
Of course.
Is, I'm reading through, again, I Never Split the Difference. And I'm sure a lot of folks on here have read that. I think you have as well. And that covers that point very, very well and in detail, right? So it was written by a hostage negotiator, and they have to be in touch with psychology, but emotions. And that's exactly what we have to do as sales professionals. And that is a tip they mentioned, is label the feeling. And, you know, and so anyway, I just, for those listening that haven't read that, awesome book. Yeah,
totally. There's also a masterclass that you can get online. It's like $90 or something. Definitely worth it. All right. So next question. So we talked about things to avoid, and there's more and more we could discuss, but given time, let's start exploring kind of a framework for what makes a productive sales conversation. How do we switch it? How do we focus on the positive now? What should we be doing?
Yeah, so first, remember that you're in charge. You're the one leading the call, right? Don't let the call get away from you. And so, you know, some of you might think, well, Dave, you just said it's super important to make the call about the prospect. It is. Those aren't two conflating ideas. They're actually separate and complementary. So the idea is you're making this about the prospect, but you're in charge of the environment. You know how Scott opened this up and he talked about the housekeeping stuff, right? And that's important in a video call as well. Like, who's been on a call before where there's like just this annoying wind in the background, right? It's blowing away on someone's cell phone because they're walking or outside, or their car windows down. It's your job as the leader to control the environment. And that's everything from pausing the meeting and saying, you know, excuse me, I think I hear someone's, you know, definitely in a wind tunnel or something. Can you please mute? I know that sounds basic. I can't tell you how many times we at Replayz, our coaches have reviewed calls where a leader doesn't actually control the call. And, you know, that goes from that right through to if personnel, let's talk about this. Let's say a prospect tries to get you into pricing too early, and that wasn't on your agenda. Remember, your agenda was, let's ask you a bunch of questions. I'll bet you at least a third of the time that happens on our calls, right? Okay, yeah, I get it, but what's the price on this? So should we talk a little bit about a few of those best practices?
Yeah.
So number one is, you know, don't be dismissive, right? Don't be like, oh yeah, we'll get to that. That's a common pitfall we see. The other is, so again, in the positive note, what we do recommend you do is acknowledge the question. Oh, hey, I understand. We really need to ask a number of questions to give you a customized quote. That often won't make someone happy though. So there's two things you can do. A, say, I'd love to walk through the structure of our pricing for a moment. We'll get into the detailed pricing at the end. Our structure is we have this upfront fee of this and this ongoing fee of that, and it fluctuates depending on your size. I won't be able to tell you that until the end. And if that doesn't satisfy, you can say, oh, we've got a range. Man, I really have to ask a few more questions until we get to that stage. Or especially if you're the SDR, right? Oh, we've got a solutions consultant who's going to jump on with you, and they'll get into that. But what you can do is give a low and a high range, and just make sure the low range isn't one that's going to get them to hang up the phone, right? Mm-hmm. So those are some of our best practices we recommend. But my point, the overarching, the meta point here is control the call. A lot of reps will say, oh, okay, sure, let's get into pricing. And you haven't actually shown value yet. And we all know that is a big, like, no, do not do that. So that's one. I think another is customer stories. So we see reps make 3 mistakes when it comes to customer stories, and I'll show you what we recommend as well. First mistake is they'll be like, hey, and for those of you that have been following our Replayz stuff, you'll have heard this before. We've got a great case study on that. I'll send it to you later. Well, I'm like, wait a sec. What are the odds they're actually going to open up that case study and either watch it or read it? And the second is, like, you're a sales professional. You're there to be a good communicator. Like, communicate it. The other thing we see is 0 customer stories. I can't tell you how often through a 45-minute sales discussion, there's 0 customer stories. So I would implore everyone, especially in these trying times, ensure you've got a customer story that matches the profile of your prospect. But then the third thing we see is people tell a customer story for like 5 minutes. And we recommend what's called a customer story soundbite, Scott. It's you do the what, the so what, and the customer story in under a minute. And it goes something like this. So if I were doing it for Replayz, I would say, we do remote we do remote call coaching for sales reps. It's like, who knows what that means, right? So it's like, and what that means is we allow account executives to improve their close win rate by 10% in just a handful of weeks. And SDRs pass more leads. And so now I've done the what, the so what in 15 seconds. And then I tie in the customer story soundbite. It's 40 seconds, and it's, and that reminds me of a customer. They started with us a few months ago. Their sales leader just did not have enough time to coach. And so they brought us in to be an extension of their coaching arm. Fast forward to today, and their account executives are closing at a 10% higher win rate. Boom, that's it. I just shared a customer story with you that, let's pretend I've done the discovery and it suits the need. So what our customers do is they take our customer story template. And by the way, if anyone wants access to that, I'm happy to give it to you, no charge. Just ping me on LinkedIn later. It walks through an exercise and a video on how to do the what, the so what, and the customer story. So how often should you use this? 3 times is what we see the best sales reps doing in a 45-minute call.
Nice. I like it. And I find, doing demolitions with you and my personal experience, the more personal you can make that soundbite, the better, right? You'll have marketing case studies. You'll have things and stories that you're coached against, but really take the time to find your stories, the people that you've helped, because that passion that you're going to have from actually helping someone yourself is impossible to replicate in like a marketing case study or soundbite. So make it personal. And then last thing, you mentioned pricing, giving them a range. I totally agree, but also be wary that savvy negotiators and savvy buyers will hold you to the bottom range if they're experienced. So if you're going to give a range, be comfortable with, hey, potentially it could go in this bottom range. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Yeah. No, it is. That's the downside of doing it. The risk is anchoring them at a price that has not in any way, shape, or form been reflective. So that is a downside. Know that going in, and I'm glad you flagged that. We have a couple more that I really want to share. Before I do, are there any other questions from?
We have a ton. We're getting some of the most questions we've got. We've got a lot, but let's cover a few more things that I know you want to cover, and then we'll use the last 10 minutes. I'm just going to rapid fire questions, and we'll try and tag team as many as we can.
I love it. Number 1, be the expert. And that might sound counterintuitive. It's like, we don't want to be know-it-alls. And that's not what I'm saying here. It's really adding a unique perspective, which is a challenger sale sort of thought process, right? And that is, I want you to think about your last 5 sales calls. And I want you to think, did you bring enough expertise that prospect got off the phone and said, man, I learned a lot. In fact, I would almost pay for that. Now, you might think that's hyperbole. It's like, who would do that? Now, I get it. Maybe in your industry, there isn't enough value to bring that they pay for it. But you get my point, that it's unfortunately, as sales professionals, we don't always have the best reputation, right? People think we're in it for ourselves. So it's important early on to separate yourself from the sales professional and be the person that can provide a level of thinking and a unique perspective that the prospect hasn't thought before. And the way you can do this is a few different ways. Number one, if you've got unique industry insights, bring those with you, right? Teach them something, not in a preachy way, but something that's going to help support your use case. And then the second thing is to share customer stories in a way that will resonate with them. And, here's what I want you to think about. You might be sitting there saying, hey, Dave, your suggestion there does not apply to me. I'm 6 months into this position. It's a new industry to me. I'm not the expert. I'm selling into people that have done their role for years. And I'm going to challenge back and say, yes, it is relevant. Here's why. So let's say you're selling into a CMO, and let's say you're a junior rep, and you've never been a CMO before. How can you speak from a position of authority? Well, the truth is, if you're speaking to CMOs all day, every day, you may have talked to 60 CMOs in the last month. How many CMOs do you think the prospect on the other end of the phone has talked to in the last month? Not 60, right? They may be on a LinkedIn group or an industry association or what have you. And even then, they're having a surface level conversation usually. They're not doing a 15-minute discovery like you are. So what people want to know, and this is why we've got sales reps sign up for this call, is what everyone else is doing. So if I'm a CMO and you can teach me what my 60 either competitors or colleagues in other industries are doing, you've just provided value to me that I couldn't get anywhere else. And you're a junior rep that's been there for 6 months. So how do you do that? You add insightful industry statistics, insights, and you add interesting best practices from your customer base that will resonate with them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes total sense. And that's a great thought experiment to play with yourself, highlighting something you said there, which is have a thought experiment where you try and get your prospects to be as comfortable paying for your services, for you consulting with them. That is how helpful you are. And the product or service that they're buying is just a byproduct of buying you. It's an interesting thought experiment and something that I've done for the majority of my career, and it's a good reframe.
I love it. I love it, Scott. The last thing I just want to say, and then let's open it up for rapid fire questions. If you are just transitioning into video, here are the best practices. Make sure you've got good lighting. A lot of people don't think it's important to have good lighting, and trust me, it is. When people see your face, there's an emotional connection that happens. There's like a serotonin release that doesn't happen, and a connection that doesn't happen over the phone or if your video's off. So if you're going to do a screen share, have your video on, good lighting, have the webcam at eye level or above. Make sure you've got fast internet, obviously. Make sure your company's paying for that. And then try and have a professional background is what I would normally say. And what I'm saying in these times, since you might not have a work at home setup, don't worry about that as much. Whatever's in the background is probably an interesting conversation starter. Just make sure it's not offensive. Remember that time I was set up at your place, Scott? There was that painting in the background and I realized it. Remember that?
I have some modern art, all right? Leave me alone.
Very modern. Glad my customer pointed that out. Anyway, I'm done. Scott, let's open this up for questions, man.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so we're just going to go. So if anyone has a question, we have about 15 to get through. We'll try and get as many as we can. Before we dive into it, because we'll go right to the hour, I do want to highlight one more time Dave's incredible initiative he's doing, trying to feed 1 million people in April. So if you want to help with the Million Meals initiative that Replayz has, I'll put the link one more time in the chat feature. Go check it out. If you can't support, like, comment, spread the word. Super helpful. Okay, we've got first question, Lori Burns. Lori, thank you for hanging out with us. What is your stance on sending emails versus phone calls? I'll say it's all about omni-channel. It's not one or the other. They are equally as important, just like social, just like incorporating video if it works. A/B test everything. I don't know your industry, but omni-channel is always the way to go. Dave, what do you think?
I agree. Yeah, omni-channel is the way to go. Start engaging with their content online if they are online on LinkedIn, etc. Understand what's important to them. We always want to get to the point where we're having a phone conversation. That's where business happens. But certainly a good prelude to that is starting to establish engagement. But do not be that person that connects with someone on LinkedIn and then sends them a sales note right after saying,
No.
hey, thanks, John, for connecting. I'd love to sell you blah, blah, blah. If you're doing that today, you're doing it wrong.
Totally. Yeah, that could be a whole other conversation, how to sell on LinkedIn. But, you know, you're not selling on LinkedIn. You're building a brand. You're building your reputation. And you can only make withdrawals once you made enough deposits. Okay. Here's a question from Kelly Gallagher. Interesting question, quite specific, and I'm going to try and synthesize it. Hopefully I'm hearing it right. Our company could have been really helpful for our prospects if they had already been clients during this climate. How and when do you suggest bringing that up? For example, we want to say, if you had hired us before, it would have saved you so much time and hard conversations, but we want to say that at the right time. So what it sounds like is Kelly sells a product or a service that would have been helpful in this time had they signed earlier. So essentially, I'm going to try and synthesize it like they've got a product or a service that is helpful during this strange climate that we're in. When and how do you bring that up? Because it's such a sensitive time.
Yeah, I think going back to what we said before, where if you've got value today, as much as, if not more today than you did a handful of weeks ago, it's important to get that across. Let's make sure we get that across in a way where we think about how that's going to make the prospect feel. If I receive that message, I might feel like it's a bit of, I might receive it okay. I think there's a certain percentage of people that might feel like, you know, it makes me feel dumb. It makes me feel like it's a slap in the face. Like, oh man, I should have gone with this earlier. Like, I understand what you're trying to do. You know, it's important to create FOMO to a certain extent, but we want to do it in a way that is respectful to the prospect. So I think I would more change it around, you know, in these times more than ever, our service, product, what have you, is relevant. And you know, I'd love to understand more about your business so we can talk about why, you know, something along those lines. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I agree. It's a little bit, it's sensitive. So be wary of that fact. And I don't think I would lead with that with cold outreach. I think it's insensitive. I think you already have to have a relationship in place and maybe bring it up, you know, in the secondary, you know, meeting of that. That's what I would do. Anyway, all right, Carolyn Chavetta, this is another cold outreach one. How can you apply the same techniques to not pepper them with questions? So the stuff that we covered earlier. I think I know some of their pains, but what if nothing lands? My quick and short answer to that is get an upfront contract. So the same rule applies. Like we said earlier, you can say on a cold call, you know, give me 30 seconds to give you my, you know, dog and pony show. I know that's Beck Holland's favorite thing to say. And then you're getting their permission to ask those questions in a cold call. So that's what I would say there. And again, highlighting, I think the same principles apply. I would go learn a little bit about mirroring, a little bit about labeling. Those can be effective on cold calls as well. Anything to add there, Dave, or should we move to the next one?
No, nothing. I think that was a good summary.
Cool. Christopher M. Chris, thanks for the question. This is more of a comment. It says, it sounds like the strategy has changed. Instead of ABC, always be closing. It's now more focused on empathy and showing you relate to their needs and actually care. You nailed it, Chris. Correct. I
would also add, though, that building ROI is just more important.
Yes.
So let's not shy away from ROI. And I think it is good to give the prospect it out by saying, we understand these are tough times. This might not be the right time for you. Right off the bat, they'll breathe a sigh of relief. You're not going to be that creepy salesperson that's trying to just close. Then I would say, but I do want to demonstrate the value that we've got here, and that they're, you know, every single dollar you spend, I imagine, is going to be scrutinized through the lens of having a direct impact on ROI. I'd love just the opportunity to share with you how we do that. Right. So we're still closing, and we're still getting there, but we're doing it, I think, in a more ROI intense way, and letting them have an escape route if they want it. Because if they don't want what you want, they're not going to take it anyway. So don't pressure them, right? It just take the pressure right off and say, I get this might not be the right time. Having said that, a number of prospects have signed up in the last handful of weeks. Here's why.
Yeah. I love that. Empathy only takes you so far. You know, they need to know that you can either make the money or save the money, and you need to be able to demonstrate that through ROI. Okay, Alina, how do you bridge the gap between engaging with one stakeholder in your solid discovery to engaging a larger group of stakeholders that were not in the initial call, who actually influence the final outcome in the next stages? Great question, Alina. Dave, how do you rope in other stakeholders? Make sure there's not someone who's calling the shots that you haven't talked to.
Oh man, it's such a great question, because we know empirically that the deals that close, especially enterprise level, have 3 or more folks that were involved, right? So number one, don't ever go above your prospect's head, your key contact. We want to make them the champion. So I would even call it that. Say, hey, are you at the point here where you would be a champion of this internally? And if so, can we strategize together on who else should see this and how? And then lean on your experience. Based on our experience, we don't get sign off on this unless a senior vice president actually sees it. Who's that person at your organization? Can we get them on a call this week? Those are some of my approaches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's a perfect answer. So let's move on, try and get a few more in here. Tim Hickey. So Tim, it sounds like Tim has a longer complex sale. So for longer software demo calls, when showing a more complicated piece of functionality, would you still recommend setting a roadmap and or agenda for all the functionality you're going to show and stringing those together over a longer demo? I say yes, for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I have a customer that was doing an 1.5 to 2 hour demos. I don't, you know what? We don't have those attention spans. So I'd always cap it off at an hour, do 2 if you need to, or 2 sprint sessions of 45 minutes. And I wouldn't make your agenda more than 6 bullet points. So I wouldn't lay out the 10 things you're going to talk about. I would just group them. That's how I would recommend doing that.
Yeah, I love it. And then another thing we did at a past organization I was at is we had a fairly complex product. We only did the 45 minutes, but then for any different like integration or niche case, we actually had demos video recorded demos that we could send. So instead of covering it on a live call where we could spend more time doing discovery, in a follow-up email, we would send them through explainer videos if they wanted to look at very specific functionality that can be helpful and save time.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing real quick there is there are those that are going to have to see the nuts and bolts, the power users, and there's those that just need to hear the value. Have 2 separate calls for those folks.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, that takes us to our time. I could sit and chat with E4Sales all day long, as we frequently do. But thank you, everyone who joined us. You guys had great questions. I know we didn't get to them all. We really tried. If you have any more questions, do reach out to Dave. He's always posting helpful stuff on LinkedIn. I promise you, if you ask him a question, he will personally answer it. So go connect with him. Keep following along on Sales Hacker. We got a lot of cool stuff in the works over the next little while. We're actually building some cool community components into it, and we're a bunch of cool stuff. So stay tuned with us. And Dave, I know we'll be following up with everyone who joined us, sending them a follow-up to let them know a little bit more about this A Million Meals initiative. Yeah. But if people want to get involved, if they want to help, how can they do that?
I would ask that they reach out to me via LinkedIn. And I would ask anyone that's listening right now, please feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, or dave@replayz.com is my email. And for the decision makers on the line, I would love it if you would just put, $1,000 donation in place that will, that's 10,000 meals right there. And we'll give you a rep, 1 seat in our Replayz certification, which is 3 weeks of training. And then for reps, I would ask that you bring this to the attention of your senior management. I would love it if you would participate. Outside of that, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I love the engagement from this group. And Scott, it's fun when you and I get together every time. So thank you.
Oh, it's fun. All right. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Stay healthy.